I'm going to call up John Harris right now, and I'm going to hand you this device. You speak into it, and it amplifies your voice.
Is that right?
It does. So if you want to hold that.
Can we speak about it more, or do we need to move on?
No, I think we can move on. It's up to you. If you want to ask me questions about it, I can try to answer them for you.
How does it work?
There's a battery.
Battery?
Yeah.
You mean like an artillery?
Yes.
Right.
That's the easy way of saying it.
All right. I'm with you now.
Now,
Yes.
for folks here who know of you because there's this town that now bears your name,
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your background. You grew up along the Susquehanna River.
Well, yes, my mother and father, being from Yorkshire, England, moved to Philadelphia in the early 1700s, and having known Mr. William Penn, received a grant so that they could have 300 acres and establish a tavern and a ferry upon the river. And so I was born there in 1726 upon the river. I have 2 older sisters, 2 younger brothers who were also born there as well.
Now, is that considered frontier?
Oh yes, yes, very much so. We at that moment, nothing had been settled anywhere near the Paxton area. It was more Indians than it was anyone else. Right.
And you had an interesting educational experience. How were you educated? How did you learn to read and write?
Well, we have no school proper in the frontier, and so my mother, having connections in Philadelphia City, would often take me down to Philadelphia, and we would live there for months at a time where I would be educated there. And on occasion, we would hire educators. Usually it was pastors who were moving through town who would preach on Sunday and then educate during the course of the week, and my father, having some extra money, would pay for the pastor to educate his children and the other children nearby, and so we would be educated there upon the home that my father had built. But most of my education was from Philadelphia proper, yes.
So Lebanon County is a little unfamiliar to you.
Lebanon County doesn't exist, does it?
Yes.
It does?
Yes.
Oh, so they carved a county out?
Yes.
Oh,
Now, I believe you might have known it as Lebanon Township.
Yes, indeed, sir, yes.
Okay.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Well, yes, it's one of my favorite areas.
You'll correct Bill, I'm sure, on what...
Well, yes, because Dauphin County and Lebanon and Lancaster County are very close to one another, and I would imagine if you want a county, you might want to carve it out of both, just as a way to help you out there. Yes. And so, if only I'd have been around, yes. And so I often find myself doing business in Philadelphia. One of my industries is fur trading, which is incredibly popular. The French and the British both love furs, and we have plenteous of furs here upon the frontier, and so I will purchase furs in from the frontiersmen who go out and do trapping and such in the frontier of the western Pennsylvania, and then store them at my home until I have enough to travel them down to Philadelphia. And so, depending on what's going on in Readingtown, I will travel to Reading, yes. Readingtown, staying in Reading a bit, and then going all the way down to Philadelphia, doing business first in Readingtown, and then on to Philadelphia to sell my furs there, and then from there they'll be sent out to England or France or somewhere like that.
That's a 2-day trip?
For me,
Go to Philadelphia?
From Harris's Ferry all the way down to Philadelphia. On a good day, it's a 2-day trip, yes.
Nowadays we have devices that get us there 3 hours.
No. And they don't use magic of any kind or sorcery or something.
No sorcery.
Right.
No sorcery. We think.
Well done.
We think.
There you go.
The government might sometimes.
And if I'm on horseback, it's easy enough to do that travel, whether I go down through Lancaster or go through Readingtown. Either way, that's a 2-day trip, normally on horseback. I have made it in a day, but you must leave at 4 in the morning from Harris's Ferry and arrive at 9 at night in Philadelphia. And you must move your horse constantly without stopping. And so it's a rather arduous journey. I've only done that once in my life. Jack, my favorite servant, saddled my horse up early in the morning, and I took off with 3,000 pounds of my own wealth.
3,000 pounds?
Indeed, sir, for the Continental cause. That was on July the 10th of 1776.
Now, were you a backer of the Continental cause?
No, oh no, not originally, sir. No. Oh no.
Now we're getting somewhere.
No, well, being that my parents were from Yorkshire, England, and being a good colonist myself, I saw no reason for independency. I had no trouble with King George. My parents had no trouble with King George II, and I had no trouble with George III. Here on the frontier, we had no difficulties with British soldiers being quarantined, I'm not quarantined, but quartered in our towns like they do in Boston, and Sons of Liberty. Well, there is nothing what we see here in Pennsylvania, so I saw no reason to separate ourselves from our sovereign. But upon the writing of the Declaration, being there in Philadelphia in 1776, June that very year, I was there arguing against independency. And yet, when independency won the day, sir, I chose to throw all of my interest in on the war and the efforts there. I made colonel in the 13th Pennsylvania, which was an honorary position, I assure you. Being at 50 years old, I was not going to take the field.
But you were a veteran.
Indeed, the French and Indian War. Right. Yes, I was a captain in the French and Indian War.
So that was a bit of a promotion.
It was, yes, I think an honorary one. Yeah,
so what changed your mind? Why did you throw your support behind the Continental cause?
As I sat on my front porch reading the Declaration, it had been printed in its entirety in the Pennsylvania Gazette. And I received a copy of it there, and sitting upon my front porch reading it, and going through all of the different arguments, sir. First off, opened my eyes to the reality that our colonies had not been well served by our sovereign, first off. Second off, and this being the larger of the issue, my countrymen, my fellow colonists had made a decision. And whether I was for it or not, I believed it was my proper position to join in with this fight. For if we would be divided, we surely would lose. And I knew good men who were in Philadelphia who voted for this. Mr. Franklin, for example. And so, you know Dr. Franklin, right?
He's been here before, yes.
Yes, I've heard that he's visited.
We've met.
And he's everywhere, let me tell you. My own efforts into the cause, my two sons, David and Johnny, both served in Thompson's battalion.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, it was interesting that you had a disagreement, but you decided to support a decision that's been made. In politics nowadays, that's not really the case. Everyone seems they seem to fall into different camps, and once a decision's made, the other side needs to say that's a terrible decision regardless. So, what your view is in hearing something like that?
Well, I'm sure I can't imagine how you've lasted this long. I find it interesting because that would cause great division among us, would it not, if we were not willing to find ourselves in good position with one another, being willing to say yes to a vote, even though I may not be all in. I may find myself at City Tavern in Philadelphia having coffee and asking the questions that I need to ask in order to understand the fullness of the issue, so that I might find my full weight thrown in to union and joining together. For I assure you, we have more than enough difficulties and more than enough enemies about us than to make one with our fellow politicians. Isn't it true? I mean, yes, certainly have enough enemies in the savages on the western frontier, or hunger for those who need to eat, for those who are less fortunate than others. We have all of those things as enemies that we should join ourselves together in combating in our communities.
Did you ever run for office? That's a pretty good speech.
Well, I was a Burgess in our town. But no, I actually thrust my son-in-law into government. Yes, Mr. McClay, who married my eldest daughter, Mary.
Now, you had 10 children, I believe.
To my second wife.
To your second wife.
Yes.
How many before that?
With 3 to my first wife, who died of consumption.
Sorry to hear that.
Yes, thank you. She was the love of my life, sir. I assure you, Elizabeth still holds a tender spot to my heart. But I found myself a new wife that very same year that she passed.
We had a long grieving process here.
I must assure you, sir, that on the frontier, grief has a very short period of life.
These are long winters, I assume. That
And I had 3 sons and a lucrative business to continue to run. And so Mary Reed from Lancaster Town, I did find her as my second wife, in which we had 11 children, 10 of whom survived. Yes. Right.
So you did keep busy in the winter.
Yes, we did keep busy in the winter times. Yes. Chopping wood.
We have smartphones and Netflix and things like that now, so that's not quite.
I have no idea what you're speaking of. No. Right.
So, the city, Mr. Harris,
Yes.
eventually bears your name.
No, my father's name.
Your father's name.
Yes,
So,
we named it after my father,
Okay.
John Harris
so
Sr.
you were alive when that happened.
In all humility, sir, I would never suggest that the town be named after myself. But instead, my father, for he received the grant from William Penn himself, not me. All of that was transferred to me upon his death, being his oldest son. I have two younger brothers who we took good care of, but still just the same, being of his namesake, all of his possessions and all of his license to trade with the Indians, license to run tavern, license to run river, a ferry across the river, all of that came to me. And so we named it, though, after my father, for he was the one who established the settlement there, established the first tavern there, established the first stockade upon the river, opened trade with the natives, made several of the treaties and contracts with the natives with Conrad Weiser. Are you familiar with Mr. Weiser? Yes, there you go. He's been to my house several times, as well as the many chiefs of multiple tribes, the Onondagas, the Shawnee, the Iroquois, the Lenni Lenape, the Delaware, the Conestogas, the list goes on of all the natives who have been to my house. And may I tell you, they stay far too long. They smell of bear grease and alcohol. Sure, yes, right. Anyway.
If you cut off the alcohol, that would probably...
Oh, they just get mad.
Yeah, you don't want that.
No.
So, the city has had its challenges of late.
Indeed. So I hear.
So, are you still proud to have it as the state capital? Is that something that was...
So it's become state capital?
It has become a state capital. You were not aware.
It's one of my wishes. I had written several letters to the governor for New York and
Which governor first?
Morris.
Okay.
And then Mifflin as well. Because you see, New York and Virginia had already moved their position of government further inland, away from the coast and in towards where the populace was beginning to live, from New York to Albany and from Williamsburg to Richmond. And so I thought only it proper that we do the same thing here in Pennsylvania, move from Philadelphia to somewhere inland. I had a unique position of watching the frontier grow and being able to take people across the river. And so I saw this constant movement of folk here upon the middle part of our colony. This is natural, yes. Oh, we're good. Good, thank you.
Well, I know you have a long horseback ride back to Harrisburg.
Yes.
So
And dinner is awaiting us.
Yes, I wanted to thank you very much for your time.
Indeed, sir.
It's been a pleasure.